The blizzard arrived like a living thing, shrieking across the prairie and swallowing the road whole. And when Cole Mercer saw the shape crawling out of the white, he almost rode past it, because men who stopped in storms like this usually froze to death beside whatever trouble they tried to save. Yet something in the way the figure collapsed made his gut clench hard enough to hurt. So he swung down, fought the wind, and found a woman half buried in snow, lashes iced shut, lips cracked blue, clutching a leather satchel like it was a last heartbeat. And when he lifted her, she weighed nothing, which scared him more than if she'd fought, because people that light were already halfway gone. And as he dragged her onto his horse, the gale slammed them sideways, the world vanishing into a spinning roar that erased sky and ground alike, forcing him to ride blind toward his line shack miles off, counting steps by memory and stubbornness while ice clawed his face. Roar, and the woman groaned once, against his chest, a thin sound that vanished instantly. And when the horse stumbled, Cole knew one more fall would end them. So he slid down and led it, boots breaking crust, breath burning his lungs, as fear whispered that no stranger was worth this, that the territory was full of bones that once tried to be kind. But then the woman's fingers twitched against his coat, and he cursed, because now it was personal, because he had saved people before and buried them anyway, and the thought of failing again drove him on through the white hell until a dark smudge appeared where no darkness should be. The shack half drowned in snow, door frozen shut, and he smashed it with his shoulder until it cracked open, hauled her inside, barred the wind, and collapsed shaking, the room stinking of cold and old smoke. And as he stripped off her soaked coat to keep her alive, he saw the satchel spill open, revealing papers sealed with a brand he knew from whispered legends. A crown of thorns over crossed spurs, the mark of the largest ranch in the territory. And his heart thudded as the woman gasped awake, eyes sharp even through fever, fixing on him with a look that carried command, fear and something dangerous, as if the storm outside had followed her in. He fed the stove with shaking hands, melted snow, forced water between her lips, and when she coughed he laughed once, a broken sound, then sobered as she tried to rise, whispering a name he didn't catch, warning him about men on the road, about a bounty riding the storm. And before he could ask, she seized his wrist with surprising strength, and hissed that if they found her he'd be dead by dawn, that they'd burn his shack and hang him as an example. And the certainty in her voice scraped his nerves raw, because liars begged and pleaded, but this woman issued facts like verdicts. And when he asked who she was, she only smiled faintly, and said it was safer not to know, which was the exact moment hooves thundered somewhere beyond the walls, muffled but real, circling like wolves, and the door shuddered under a testing blow while Cole reached for his rifle, realizing the storm had delivered him not a victim but a war, and he was already standing in the middle of it. Outside, voices were swallowed by wind, yet close enough to scrape the air, and a lantern glow smeared against the frosted window like a watching eye, forcing Cole to make a choice he hadn't known existed an hour before, because he could open the door and surrender her to whatever law rode with that glow, or he could lie, fight, and possibly die for a stranger whose secrets weighed heavier than the snow on the roof. And as the woman's breathing steadied, she murmured that the brand on the papers would damn them, both if seen. That power always came with enemies. And the stove popped loud as a gunshot, making the men outside shout, while Cole slid the satchel under a loose board, jaw set, heart hammering, knowing the blizzard was the least deadly thing howling now. Cole didn't breathe as the knock came again, harder this time, rattling the door frame while the woman pulled herself upright, despite his grip, her eyes burning with a will that ignored pain. And she whispered that the men outside weren't law. They were debt collectors with rifles and ropes, and that they wouldn't stop at killing her. They'd take the land, burn records, erase witnesses. And Cole felt the cold slide deeper into his bones, because he knew those men. Not by name, but by type, the kind that wore badges when convenient and masks when not. So he shoved her toward the bunk, kicked loose floorboards aside, and hid the satchel where rot had already gnawed the wood, then shoved a blanket over her, just as the door cracked open and a man leaned in, beard-iced white, eyes bright and cruel, asking if Cole had seen a woman on the road, saying a reward would be paid for information. And Cole lied without blinking, said only snow passed here, said the storm ate everything, and when the man smiled it was wrong, too patient, as if he already knew the answer and was just tasting fear. And he stepped inside without waiting, boots tracking slush, 2 more shadows following, rifles slung easy, and the woman's breath hitched under the blanket. So Cole coughed, swore about frostbite, shoved a cup into the leader's hand, forcing him to grip iron-hot tin. And while the man cursed, Cole used the moment to shift his rifle closer, every second stretching like wire, because one wrong move would end with blood freezing black on the dirt floor. And the leader's gaze slid to the bunk, narrowed, then flicked to the stove, the walls, the floor, and he said storms made men see ghosts. That Cole should be careful what he sheltered, because some women carried curses that buried whole counties. And the woman suddenly spoke, weak and trembling, playing the role Cole hadn't dared. Imagine calling him husband, saying the baby kicked and she couldn't breathe. And the lie hit the room like smoke, confusing and thick, the men hesitating because even killers paused at the wrong kind of sin. And the leader spat, muttered about wasting time, and ordered a search anyway, forcing Cole's heart into his throat. As one man pried at the floor near the hidden board, knife scraping, wood groaning, and Cole tensed to shoot, knowing it would doom them both, when the wind screamed so loud the shack shook, and the roof dumped a sheet of snow through a cracked seam, blinding the men long enough for the woman to scream convincingly and collapse. And the leader snarled to leave it, saying no ranch was worth freezing for, and they backed out cursing, lantern light fading, hooves retreating. And only when the door slammed did Cole sag, laughter bubbling up wild and broken, while the woman stared at him with something like wonder and calculation, thanking him, saying few men would lie to armed strangers. And when he demanded the truth, she finally said her name was Mara Vale, that she owned everything between the river and the Red Hills, that the brand he'd seen was hers, and that by sunrise every gun in the territory would be looking for her. And now for him too. She warned him the blizzard was no accident, that her foreman had sold her route for silver and a promise, that the men would return with fire once the wind eased. And Cole realized the storm had chosen sides, because outside the howl shifted, dying into a waiting silence that felt worse. And as he checked the door and windows, she rose unsteadily, revealing a pistol strapped beneath her dress, eyes hard now, no longer pretending. And she said if they survived, the night she would repay the debt in a way he wouldn't believe. But if they didn't, he should remember that he'd stood for something once. And the words settled heavy between them as distant hooves sounded again. Closer, many this time, surrounding the shack while the stove guttered low. The wind paused, like a held breath before the first shot cracked the night open. The first bullet punched through the wall and buried itself in the stove with a scream of metal. And Cole dragged Mara down as splinters flew, the shack erupting into chaos while shadows moved outside like a closing noose. And he understood with brutal clarity that this was no longer about rescue, but siege. Because men who shot first in a blizzard didn't plan to leave witnesses. So he fired back through the thin planks, counting shots by instinct. Smoke choking the room as the attackers fanned out, torches flaring. And when flames licked the roof, Cole felt time collapse into a single violent thread, forcing him to grab the satchel and hurl it into the fire, watching branded papers curl and blacken while Mara stared in shock. Then grim understanding, because proof could be remade, but survival could not. And as the fire climbed, he kicked open the back wall where rot had eaten through, shoving her into the white, just as the shack exploded in sparks. Gunfire following them into the storm, men shouting in rage at the burning lie. And Cole led her toward a ravine only he knew, sliding down ice and rock while bullets snapped overhead, one tearing his arm open, warmth spilling fast. Yet he kept moving until the earth swallowed them and sound dulled. hiding among frozen brush as the men searched, cursed, then split up, certain their prize was dead or buried. And when dawn finally bled grey into the sky, the riders were gone, leaving only tracks circling ashes, and Cole sagged dizzy, expecting Mara to leave him there. But instead she bound his wound with practice. Henson said quietly that loyalty bought with blood lasted longer than land, that by nightfall her ranch hands would sweep the area clean. And true to her word, wagons came, armed and relentless, driving off the traitors, hanging the foreman by his own ledger. And weeks later, Cole stood healed but restless at the edge of a vast estate he'd only heard about in rumors, watching Mara command men twice his size with a glance. And when she offered him gold enough to buy a kingdom, he shook his head, saying he'd already been paid. So she smiled, sharp and real, and offered him something heavier, a place beside her, protection written in iron and name. And as he took her hand, he realized the shock. Wasn't that she owned the largest ranch in the territory, but that by choosing to save a stranger in a blizzard, he had unknowingly claimed a future no storm could ever take from him.